Hey, it's Mr. Turk. I am walking you guys through making a portrait frame collage. The last video I made on YouTube kind of has some issues with it. You can still look at that one, it still works. But I was going to walk through some of the steps and how to do this. Before you start this project, this is a project where you kind of collage different photos that are meaningful to you into a portrait photo. So before you even start, make sure you make a folder, gather photos, a portrait photo, photos that you find important to you. So I just have some family photos here, some photos of different things I like doing and places I've been. To start, you want to open up your portrait photo. So I have a portrait photo right here. I'm just going to drag and drop that into Photoshop. Before I start doing a ton of work on this project, I want to make sure that, if Photoshop crashes, I don't lose all my progress. So to start, I'm just going to go to my menu, my file menu. We're going to click Save As. And what you want to make sure you do is you want to make sure you save this as a Photoshop document. So right now, by default, it's not a Photoshop document, so I just turned the type from ping file to Photoshop. And I'm going to save that in this folder here. I'm just going to change the number. And then save it as a Photoshop document. The very first thing you should do is cut out your portrait. If you don't remember how to do basic stuff like that, Photoshop is really automated now. So I can just click on this little select subject button at the bottom in my floating toolbar right here. And I can let the computer do the work. So once you see the marching ants, those dotted lines that are kind of moving around your portrait, you can click on the Add a Layer Mask button in your floating toolbar, or you can click on that exact same button in your Layers panel to add a layer mask. You'll see that your background is a checkerboard. So that's how you know you did this correctly, is we cut out our portrait from the background. If you want to add a background as like a solid color, you can add a solid color layer in your layers panel. So at the very bottom of your layers panel, click on the little half black and white circle. In this menu, you can choose to add a solid color or a gradient background. I'm just going to add a solid color background for now. And then in my color picker, I can pick whatever color I want. I'm going to pick, let's pick out a blue and click OK. And then in my layers panel, it's covering up my portrait. So I'm just going to drag and drop this color fill layer below my portrait. And for now, I've got my portrait cut out. What I need next are some grid lines so that when I add my photos to my layout, I kind of know how I want to line them up. This is really easy to do. Go to your view menu. In your view menu, hover down the list until you see the word guides. Hover over to this submenu and choose new guide layout. When this opens up, you can pick kind of whatever you want. So I can, click here and I can type a number if I want, or I can click inside of this and with my scroll wheel on my mouse, I can just scroll to increase the number. And you can do any number you want of rows or columns. You don't want to do like a little bit like this. Don't do 3 rows and 3 columns. Make sure it's more than at least 5. so that you have plenty of areas to line up photos. Once you've got this looking how you want it to look, you can click OK. The only thing that's kind of annoying about guides is if you accidentally click and drag on a guide, you're going to move where that guide was. So I'm going to hit Control Z to undo that. And if you notice your guides are moving around when you click and drag on them, that's a bad thing. You kind of don't want that. So take your move tool, right? Your move tool is this top tool at the top. Click in the empty space so that none of your layers are selected, and go to your properties panel. When you're in your properties panel, if you scroll down, you'll see a section for guides. And in this section, I recommend you lock your guides in place. And if you don't want to see your guides, you can turn them on and off with this little button right here. For now, though, I'm just going to lock my guides in place and leave them visible, because what we need to do is put our photos in here and then cut out our photos or add some color shapes or kind of start to decorate our graphic here. To start, I'm going to add some photos. So I'm going to go back to my folder in File Explorer. To add a photo to our document, you just drag and drop. So I'm going to add this photo of some mountains here. I'm just going to take this photo, drag it into my open file, and then let go of my mouse. When you place a photo in Photoshop, you can click and drag on it to position it. If you want it to be bigger or smaller, you don't have to hold down the Shift key anymore. You can just resize it. And I'm going to try to line this up with my guides. If I change my mind, I can always resize these later to confirm. Once you're done placing your file and you resize it, to confirm that placement, you can click on the Done button. You can double click on the image. You can also click the check mark. And I'm just going to keep doing that real quick here, just to review. Any photo you want to put in your document, drag and drop it. Resize your photo. Again, if you want it to line up with your grid, make it line up with the grid. If not, you can just kind of put it wherever you want, but I would recommend snapping it into a corner at least. And then you can click Done, you can double click, you can tap Enter. So I'm going to take a minute here, and I'm going to place a few more photos. All right, so I placed about 4 or 5 different photos. Again, if you don't like where you put your photos, just make sure, if you're using your move tool here, turn on your transform controls. And if you click on a photo, you should see these white squares on the corners and in the center of your photo. You can click and drag on your photo to resize it. Every time you do this, though, you have to make sure that you click Done, double click on it, or click the check mark at the top of the screen to confirm that transformation. So if you want, you can move your photos around. Once you've got your photos placed where you want your photos. If you look at the portrait frame graphic examples, you'll notice that some of these examples here, in fact, most of them, the portraits are almost like they're inside of the main portrait. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to add a layer mask to these photos to kind of put them inside of our main portrait. That's really easy to do. We actually don't need to do any extra work. We already have a layer mask in our layers panel. So go to your layers panel, and at the bottom of your layers panel, remember the first thing we cut out was your portrait. If you cut out your portrait correctly, you should have a really good layer mask already. And that's actually what we want to use to, hide some of our photos that are sticking out past the portrait. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually select the layer mask on my portrait layer and add that layer mask to other layers. To select my layer mask, I'm just going to hold down my control key, and then I'm going to click on the layer thumbnail for that layer, right on the layer mask right here. If I hold down control and click on that thumbnail, you'll see that the marching ants that we initially saw are back. So now that I have that outline selected, I want to go to my mountain layer here. If you're not sure which layer it is, you can actually just click on it to just snap to that layer, and you should be able to jump to it. If you're still not sure if it's the right layer, in your layers panel, you can click on the eyeball to hide it and to show it. You want to make sure before you do this next step that you're on the layer you want to cut out. And it's the exact same step as the very first step. To add a layer mask, you simply click on the layer mask button. Now, this layer mask is going to cut out part of this landscape photo and kind of hide it. And that is kind of what I want for that photo, because I want it to cover up my eye. For this photo over here, I kind of want to make it look like it's behind my head. And then I want to change my layer mask. So I'm going to do the exact same step. I'm going to hold down my control key. I'm going to click on the layer mask below to load in that layer mask. To get to the flower layer, I'm going to use my move tool, and I'm going to click on that layer to jump to that layer. And this time, instead of, just leaving it as is, I'm going to add my layer mask. And I can change the appearance of my layer mask. So to start, I don't actually want to put the flowers over my ear. I just want to put a few of the flowers over my ear. So I'm going to click on the layer mask thumbnail on that flower layer. In my properties panel on the right hand side of the screen, you can do some really basic stuff. So I'm going to scroll to the bottom of my properties panel. At the very bottom of my properties panel right here, I can actually swap my mask. So I'm going to click invert, and that's going to switch it so that my flowers are showing in the background, but they're not showing over my ear. And I also want to paint some of those flowers back in to make it look like it's kind of wrapping around my head. So I'm going to scroll up in my properties panel here, and I'm actually going to turn down the density of my mask so I can see what I'm doing. So I'm going to turn down the density slider here. And that's actually going to make my layer mask a little bit more visible. To edit a layer mask, you just need to equip your brush tool and modify the layer mask by painting with black and white pixels. So I'm going to take my brush tool, which is right over here. I'm going to equip kind of a normal round brush. I'm going to make sure I'm using white pixels. To set your colors to the default, you just click on this little icon here. Make sure you got white as your foreground color. And then to zoom in, you can hit Control plus or Alt in your scroll wheel. And I'm just going to paint some of these flowers back in using my tablet. You can use your mouse if you want. And it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm just going to do a really quick paint a couple flowers in. It's okay if it doesn't look perfect. There we go. Look at that. Now, if I turn up my density to 100% in my properties panel, you'll kind of see what's happening. Some of these flowers are overlapping. So that's how you add a layer mask, and that's how you modify a layer mask. You can do some really simple stuff like that. All right? After you get the hang of that, what you're probably going to want to add is a little bit of extra to your images, or you might want to change some of your images to black and white, or you might want to add some colored shapes. So changing the appearance of your photos is actually really easy. If you take your move tool and you click on a photo, you can do one of two things. You can do a layer style, or you can do an adjustment layer. And you want to try both. Let's start with a really easy one. I'm going to zoom in on this group photo of me and my wife. To edit that layer and add a layer style, all I need to do is double click on this layer in the empty space right next to it. And you can add any layer style you want. For this particular layer, I just want to give it a little bit of color. So all I'm going to do is add a color overlay. Color overlay is kind of in the middle here, so I'm going to click on the word color overlay. And by default, it's kind of picking the last color I use, which is this green color. If I don't like it, I can click on this little icon and pick whatever color I want. I'm going to pick kind of a pink, like so, and click OK. And then I'm going to change my blending mode to something else, like overlay. And you can see it's kind of making the photo pink. If I don't want it to be so intense, I can turn down the opacity, or I can change the blending mode. And again, you can kind of, experiment. There's tons of different layer styles you can use. So let's click OK. If we change our mind, we can always double click on this layer again, and we can change our mind. We can add more stuff. We can turn it off. It's optional. Let's say we don't want to do a layer style and we want to change this photo to black and white. Again, start by clicking on your photo to get to that layer. To add an adjustment layer, go to the middle right side of your screen where your properties panel is, and you're going to see another panel called the adjustments panel. If you click on the adjustments panel, I don't recommend, when you're first learning how to use this, using the presets. I recommend using single adjustments. And we just want to make our photo black and white. So when I click on single adjustments here, I'm going to click on the black and white adjustment layer. Now that I've added this, you'll probably realize, oh, wait a minute, it's turning everything black and white. And that's kind of not what I want. And that is because you have this adjustment layer above a bunch of other layers. If I drag it below a layer, notice how it doesn't affect it anymore. We really only want it to affect one layer. So we're going to use our clipping mask option to clip it to the layer below. The fastest way to do this is to hold down your Alt key and click between the layers, and that will clip it to the layer below. If you don't like using your keyboard to do that, just make sure you click on your adjustment layer, and in the properties panel, at the very bottom of the properties panel, right here, is the option to click on clip on layers. So if I click this button, it'll clip it to the layer directly below it. And the way the properties panel works for this is when you're doing black and white, clicking and dragging on these sliders will change how light and dark certain colors are. Like if I want the greens darker, I can make them darker. And each adjustment layer comes with a layer mask. So if I wanted to, I could click on my layer mask. And if I didn't want black and white for my wife, I could take my brush tool and let's just kind of paint out the black and white effects so that it only affects the background and not the photo of my wife. I didn't do a good job painting here, but you can kind of tell what's happening. Now, after you do some basic stuff like that, if you want to add some more decoration to this, it's a little empty. And if you want, you can also add things like the white stripes between layers. To do that, you actually have to draw them, or you actually have to paint them. And I'm going to show you guys two ways to do that. I'm going to show you one way to do it with your shape tool, and then I'm going to show you a way to do it with painting and drawing. And you can pick and choose which method you want to use. So let's pretend we want to add some basic colored shapes. You'll notice that you do have a shape tool in your toolbar. If you look at the bottom of your toolbar and you click on the rectangle tool, this tool makes shapes. What I recommend you do is, if you want your shapes to be just a shape, make sure when you're using this tool that you set it from path mode to shape mode. When it's in shape mode, when you click and drag, you just make a regular shape. So I'm going to change the fill color of my shape for now to green so that you can see it. And then I'm going to just make a little green shape over here by clicking and dragging. So that's pretty cool, right? The only problem is it kind of covers up my portrait. For things like shapes, you can add things like a layer mask to it, but what you might want to do with the shape is change its blending mode. So for this shape layer, I'm going to go to my layers panel here. If you want to see the photo below and you want it to change colors below, you can change your blending mode from normal to a different blending mode. And you'll notice, kind of like my color overlay in my layer style here, it'll actually just change the color of what's below it. So I actually kind of like how it changes the color when it's set to linear light. So I'm going to leave it set to linear light. And again, you can always change your mind if you decide you don't want to do a blending mode on those. And if you wanted to, you could use this exact same tool to draw white stripes that kind of break up your space. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is to actually paint and draw. And this is also an option. All right. I do recommend, if you want it to look clean and nice, that you can just like freehand paint on layers. But if you want it to look nice, what I recommend is make a selection first and then paint into that selection. So let's just pretend we want to add some white borders around some of these images here. I'm just going to take my rectangular marquee tool just at the top of my toolbar here. I'm going to make sure that I don't paint on another layer, right? So I'm going to make a new layer. In my layers panel, I'm going to click on this little plus sign at the very bottom to make a new blank layer. And then to make a selection with this tool, you just click and drag. And I'm going to kind of click and drag between my guides here. If you want to make some more selections here and you don't want to paint section by section, at the top of your screen, you can change your selection mode to add to selection. When it's set to add to selection, if I click and drag another rectangle, I can kind of combine my selections, and you can kind of see where this is going. If I just sort of combine a couple of these, I'll make a little container, and then if I want to paint inside of there, I just need to equip my brush tool, switch to whatever color I want. In this case, I just want white pixels, and then just click and drag, and you can kind of paint white borders like so. When you're done drawing and you don't want to paint inside of this selection, you can deselect it. And then again, you can add a layer mask to kind of hide some of these extra white borders. You can take your eraser and you can erase them if you just want to do that by hand, right? Again, if you want to paint borders, totally up to you. If you want to add shapes with colors, totally up to you. Again, you can make the borders with shapes, or you can just paint inside of a selection to add color to your image. If this still doesn't really kind of float your boat and you want to make it a little bit extra, right? I recommend using things like filters. Now, filters are kind of tough to use because when you add a filter to something, it's permanent. But if you're smart, what you'll do is you'll copy and paste something and then apply a filter to it, so that way you don't ruin your original photo. Let's say I don't want to show the front of my face because I don't really like how it looks, and I just want to apply a filter to it to make it look kind of different and not super clear. Before I try a filter on this layer, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste this layer. And I actually don't want to apply the filter to the whole photo. I just want to copy and paste a part of the photo. Remember, you need to make a selection if you want to copy and paste something. So I'm just going to copy and paste a small region. So I'm going to take my rectangular marquee tool and I'm going to click and drag over the front of my face. make sure that you are on the layer you want to copy and paste from. In this case, I already clicked on my portrait layer, and that's the layer I want to copy and paste. So now I'm going to do basic keyboard shortcuts. Control C, Control V. And if you did it right, you should notice nothing different. But if you look at your layers panel, right, you'll notice I have an extra layer between my portrait and my flowers here. This is the layer that I can apply a filter to. So if I click on this layer, at the top of my screen, go to the filter menu. And then, again, you can do whatever you want, any filter you want. Before you add a filter, if you're not sure what you want, you can click on this option here, Convert for Smart Filters. And that just makes it a protected object so that you can change your mind later if you decide the filter is too much. Go back to your filter menu, pick any filter you want. I'm just going to go to Pixelate, and let's do color halftone. So to see what it does, I actually have to pick my settings in here and then click OK. If I didn't like how that filter turned out, because I made it a smart filter, I could just double click on it, change my settings. If you want to see what a filter does a little bit faster, right? Let's just turn that filter off. Go back to your filter menu. If you go to the filter gallery, that kind of shows you what each filter does. So I'm going to look at my different filters here. If I just kind of click on them, right, you can kind of see what different filters do. You can click and drag on your sliders, change your settings, and then click OK, and that'll add that filter to that section. So again, all of this stuff you should have in your portrait graphic. If you're not sure what it's going to look like, go to your properties panel, make sure you're not on any layers, and you can hide your guides to kind of look at it. If it's not quite looking the way you want it to look and you want a little bit of help, make sure you ask for help. But these are the basics. This is how you add your photos. This is how you change the colors. This is how you cut them out. Try all of this stuff in your portrait graphic.